Good morning.
Good morning, James.
Hi, Cynthia.
Morning, everyone. I think we'll start pretty shortly. I think when Deb lets me know that she's let everyone in, just so you know, the recording has started.
We should be good to go, Jay.
Okay. Let's see. Sorry, it's hard to see exactly who's in here with the sharing going on. So, and then on the SPS side, you guys we're just going to do a very quick intro overview and then turn it over to you. You guys are ready?
Yeah, I'm ready to share when needed.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, no time like the present. Let's get started here. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jay Griffin. I'm with GridWorks, joined by Mike Stout. Let's see. I'm sorry. I can't see what I'm sharing. Margie Tatro and Deborah are joining me here today from GridWorks. We've convened as requested, a demand-side resource modeling subgroup meeting. And just want to remind everyone, this is being recorded. This is we've been asked to present materials, further materials from SPS on their demand-side resource assumptions and look at that information further. Here we go. Sorry. Our agenda is pretty quick and right to the point today. First focus area, build, review, and discuss SPS assumptions for demand-side resources. And then the balance time remaining, we'll discuss the implications of those for developing alternative scenarios. I think as we have in the past, if you have questions, please post them in the chat as we go along. And then as we get to the end of we'll run through the presentation materials from SPS, and then we'll field the questions after that. So please post your questions in the chat and we'll work from there. And the last point here, we're going to kick off the presentations just in a minute. And we've allocated about 45 minutes for those presentations, and then facilitate questions in the format I just talked about until approximately 10:15, and then spend the last 15 minutes or more, if we get through that quicker, talking about potential modeling scenarios based on the information that we saw. So unless there's any questions on the agenda and the topics, I think we'll turn it right over to the SPS team. And just want to say welcome, everyone. It's good to see your faces here on the Zoom. And last thing I'll say, we have another meeting on July 6th for all stakeholders, and more information on that meeting will be coming up as well. Hearing no questions, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to the SPS folks. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Looks like it's not sharing.
Sharing.
Everyone able to see that screen? Great, thank you.
Thanks, John.
So good morning, everybody. Excited to be back with this group talking about load forecasting again. For those who were in the meeting a couple of weeks ago, I went through at a high level our forecasting process. Talked about the assumptions we make, the exogenous adjustments we make, and then on the second day in the workshop provided a little bit more insight into how we do our new load forecasting or our oil and gas load forecasting. The takeaway from that meeting was, okay, but let's understand a little bit more about what's in the base forecast, specifically some of these external or the exogenous adjustments we're making to our models. So those are for demand side management, DG solar, EV adoption, and then demand response, which is peak impacts only. I will say that for most of these forecasts, my team, the forecasting team, is a taker from other groups within the company are actually developing these forecasts. So I've invited some friends along in case there's questions about specifically what's in the numbers or what's driving the specific forecast themselves. But I'll go through what's in there and we can see where the questions take us. So first, looking at the DSM forecast, we do have a forecast for both New Mexico and Texas. They're broken out into residential and non-residential. For the purposes of this chart, I broke out the New Mexico one into the residential and non-residential buckets, and then just showed the Texas total. You can see that the expected future reductions from DSM programs are ramping up over time through the late 2030s, and then also the peak reductions as well. By the late 2030s, we have DSM sales reductions approaching 1,200 gigawatt hours, with 850 of that being in New Mexico. So that means if we weren't running any future programs, our sales forecast or our energy forecast would be 1,200 gigawatts higher for the system. And then we have peak reductions approaching 210 megawatts, with 125 megawatts of that in New Mexico. For the DG solar forecast, we have a forecast for the state of New Mexico, and we are developing both for residential and non-residential. So this, the forecast here and what's going to go into the IRP is based on our latest update, which is spring 2023. And by 2050, so you can see that this continues to grow over time. By 2050, we're approaching sales reductions of 360 gigawatt hours and peak reductions of 80 megawatts. And then finally, the electric vehicle adoption forecast. So the last two I talked about were negatives to the forecast, reductions to sales, reductions to peak demand. EVs obviously add sales due to charging and add peak demand. And the base forecast or the mid case forecast that we're using in the IRP shows pretty rapid adoption after about the mid 2030s. We get up to 725,000 vehicles in SPS by 2050, with 165,000 of those being in New Mexico. And this is a combination of light duty, heavy duty, and medium duty. We do have separate forecasts for those three. I just bundled them together for this chart. 6,500 gigawatt hours of charging sales, with 1,200 of those in New Mexico, and a 740 megawatt peak demand impact, with 160 of that in New Mexico. Demand response, we have another presenter that'll cover the demand response programs we currently have in enrollment, those kinds of things. So that's where I'm going to leave my presentation, but certainly happy to answer any high level questions, or if there are more detailed questions, we can send it to the subject matter experts.
Got a question here from Cynthia.
Sure.
Can you see it here in the chat, John?
I don't have the chat up anymore.
Oh, sorry. So her question, yeah, how does the EV demand overlap with the peak?
Yeah, so good question. This is specifically the peak impact of EV demand. So not the highest load we're going to see from EV charging. That will be, not during peak hours. This is the peak hour impact of demand. The load shapes do assume, a fair amount of charging off the peak window.
When you say a fair amount, do you mean 2, 3, 4 times more than what you're showing as the peak, or what?
Good question, and that one I might send to our EV team if they happen to know the answer to that.
Yeah, John, give us a sec and Chris will jump in and give that, for that times, that percentage difference.
Yeah,
Great.
it's not a huge matter.
Can you repeat the question?
I'm wondering what percentage are you assuming is off peak or, yeah, not on peak? If this is only the peak.
So what would the total max demand be? Not necessarily at the peak hour.
Let me look. I don't know that offhand. I can dig into it and get right back to you.
Maybe
This
can
is the latest forecast, Chris.
can I pose that a little differently? Can you share the load shape itself?
We could certainly.
So maybe that would,
That's detail we could provide. Not today, obviously, but we can certainly provide it in the future.
yeah, we can take notes and have a follow-up. So deal with that.
Yeah.
We can get the
Thank
underlying.
you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Jerry.
Because that'll help show the difference between the light duty, medium duty, and heavy duty as well. The
Great.
assumptions that we're making there.
And then on the, let's see, oh, never mind.
John, I think we were trying to run through all your material and then go to questions, but you opened this up. But I think it's fine if we have some clarifying questions, but if
Oh,
your team
apologies.
wanted
I
to-
didn't know we were doing all the SPS. I thought it was just
Sorry.
presentation by
Right, I
presentation.
mean,
Yeah.
I think this has been
That's fine.
helpful clarification, but
Sure.
just to make sure we leave enough time for all the presentation. So is that, unless there's any other clarifying questions for now, looks like we're going to run through things quickly anyway, so we'll have plenty of time for questions. But if we want to move into the next topic that you guys have.
Sure, Jeremy,
Great.
Lovelady, do you want to jump in and just talk about our current programs?
Sure, I can do that.
And then Jay, I think that's it for SPS presentations. We can open it up to questions after that.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Zoe.
Is everyone able to see my screen here? Seconds. About now. Everyone able to see that?
Ken, and just for the group's benefit here, if you don't have too much more, please pose your questions in the chat. Because we're gonna have plenty of time for further discussion. Go ahead, Jeremy. Thanks.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeremy Lovelady. I think I met most of you all in some form or fashion at the last stakeholder meeting. I'm a regulatory policy specialist for our customer solutions group. Work in tandem with SPS Regulatory on a lot of the customer-facing programs. Today, I wanted to chat a little bit about our current climate in our energy efficiency and load management portfolio and programs. We run off the EE rules and statutes that require, all IOUs to achieve savings of no less than 5% of 2020 total retail sales to customers that have the eligibility to participate in program years 21 through 25. Those rules were implemented in 2019 based off of a statute change. SPS last filed their last triennial actually it's 2022 for program years 3, 4, and 5. So we're starting that new triennial process currently. We do file those triennial filings staggered with PNM and EPE. So every year a new utility has a new filing. And then our funding level for these EE and load management programs are set at 3 to 5% of customers' bills. And that's really important because, as we all know, with gas prices going up and down, we've seen that volatility as well in that 3 to 5% across the utilities. And then normally the way the rule is set up is any overages or underages are applied to the following plan year. So for instance, in 22, if you had an overage or underage, it would be applied to 24. Same here in 2023, if we expect to underspend from what the tariff collected to what we actually spent in the portfolio, we would add that extra amount to the 25 budget and spend that money there, and vice versa. If we overspent, we would take that money out of there. Programs must be cost effective at the utility cost test level. That runs across the board, demand management and energy efficiency through res and commercial programs. That's consistent across the board, again, through all utilities, and is at a statute level change there. Programs must be evaluated every 3 years by a statewide evaluator. Ecometric is the new statewide evaluator as of 2023. Evergreen Economics had been the statewide evaluator selected by the state for several years prior. And just wanted to note that all of our plans and our annual reports are on xlenergy.com. Just important to make sure that you click the New Mexico state, and then it's under rates and regulatory under there. So all of our annual reports are filed there, along with some really great information on our programs. I know that this is kind of more demand management focused today, so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the history and some of the current things that we have in market. Prior to 2019, we actually had some saver switch programs in market that were tied to your AC units, and we also had an interruptible credit option program. Prior to 2019, obviously SPS didn't really have a need for some of those programs, and the customers didn't have kind of the incentives, in order for enrollment. And so those programs kind of just on the res and the business side, just kind of chugged along. No real enrollment gains, no real enrollment losses. And so in 2019, based on the company being on capacity, we ended up removing those programs from the portfolio. Saber Switch is somewhat of an older system and was a little bit more technical and required a lot more maintenance. And so we felt like if there was going to be anything new that we would add on the market, it would be a different offering. Fast forward to the latest into 2022 and 2023. In the last triennial, we had offered 2 programs, one a residential thermostat rewards program, as you see here, and then a business thermostat rewards program. These programs are consistent kind of across, some of you may refer to them as AC rewards in other states that we have, but these programs are economies of scale wise, very cost effective, as well as provide some sort of, base value for demand management starting off and kind of starting to enroll customers back in these programs. So again, residential and then small business. We have started to look at obviously the need for industrial customers in the future and their needs for demand management, and really wanting to be able to utilize those customers as best as we can. We are looking at different offerings at this time, but nothing has been filed in any of our filings. Upcoming, when we look at what we're planning on doing next, our next scheduled triennial filing is scheduled, we file May 15th of 2025 for plan years 26, 27, and 28. And we'll make that filing, consistent with the rule there. And I think that's it. That's all I had for slides today.
So I think, Jay, this is Ben. Sorry, we didn't have a huge amount to present today, but what we did ensure is we had all the right people on this phone call. So we got people from the load forecasting group, from the demand response group, etc. So really just hoping to get as many questions as we can while we've got the experts on the phone. So I will throw it back over to you guys.
Yeah, no, thanks to all of you, especially Jeremy and John. So I have some questions that I've been writing down, but this is for the group's benefit. So please, nobody's posted anything in the chat yet. So James, do you want to come online and ask your question?
Good morning. Yeah, with pleasure. So I'm James Hall with ExxonMobil. So that very first slide that was shown at the beginning of the conversation, you went through it quite quickly. I think the conclusion was the assumption is decreasing sales of 1.2 gigawatts going out over a certain time frame. Was that right?
Yeah, that was specifically for some impacts on sales. That wasn't kind of an overall change in the sales outlook. It was the reductions due to DSM programs.
I see.
So to get the presentation you guys gave to us back in Roswell showed the net, that was your net forecast, right? And
So this is, yeah, a component of that net forecast is this 1,200 reduction, but overall there's increasing sales.
So James, yeah, the James.
Right,
this
so I
was-
guess, I mean, obviously the genesis of my question is, how do you consider or roll in some extra work that's being done by the oil and gas industry that predicts an increasing load over, fairly dramatically out to 2032? Is that a case that we're going to talk about a little later as one of the options to consider?
I'll leave it up to Ben to help think about which options to consider. In the last meeting, however, I did go through how we incorporate new. I'm not sure if you're in this session or not. In one of the breakouts, I talked about how we incorporate the new load, which is essentially the expansion of oil and gas, some data centers, those kinds of things into the forecast. And we're working closely with the customers, as you know, to understand their needs and to include it in the forecast to try to meet that demand. We make some assumptions about load, like we get demand requests from our customers. We make some assumptions about load factors and stuff in order to get it to an energy. But yeah, we are incorporating some of the requests that our customers are giving us.
Yeah, so James, maybe if I can jump in there and piggyback off what John was just saying. So first of all, everything John's presented this morning, like he said, was kind of the DSM impact. So the impacts to kind of saver programs to reduce load. Overall, though, we're seeing huge load growth potential, certainly in Southeast New Mexico. So we're going to evaluate 3 different load forecasts in the IRP. We're going to do kind of like a conservative approach, which has reasonable or relatively small load growth. We've got a planning forecast, which is incorporating some substantial load growth in the Southeast New Mexico, but not the kind of the levels that you and I have discussed before. And then we're going to do a third load forecast, which is going to be the electrification emerging technologies load forecast. And that is going to incorporate most of the load growth you're likely to see in the Permian Basin.
Okay, very good. That sounds good. Thanks, man.
Thanks. That cover your questions, James?
Very much so. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. Cynthia, you had a question here in the chat on if you want to come online and ask.
Yeah, let's see. I'm trying to get more questions in here. Let's see. I was interested on hearing more about the economies of scale of the DR offerings. Jeremy, you sounded positive and upbeat about that with your 2 programs. And then I'm not sure whether I'm seeing in the data that you provided, thank you very much, your forecast of the DR build out. Is that part of the DSM forecast? Not sure about that. And then the last point or question is, what is your cost per
Ready?
year?
I gotta take in her back to get ready.
What?
Where's Grandma Jane? She's in the shower.
Sorry, we have somebody. Can you please mute yourself?
Yeah. And then just wondering, what is your cost per KW year for both of the programs, either singular or combined?
Let's see. Cynthia, can we take those one at a time?
Sure.
Yeah. Just to sort through for the teacher.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So I think, is that for John? For the SPS team?
Yeah, Jeremy, I'd like to hear more about the economies of scale on your DR offerings and your build out forecast.
Yeah, I can't speak a lot about the forecast, but I can speak a little bit about, the current offerings that we have down there. We have seen a lot of people interested in the thermostat programs that are currently in market, right? I think one of the challenges that we see is getting, especially in some of these homes in New Mexico, on the residential side, getting them to actually install these thermostats. And so we're looking at a direct install component to try to help drive some of that and getting more thermostats in more people's homes. That's not something that's currently in the plan, currently approved in the plan that we have, Cynthia. On the business side, in our last triennial, we did file for some additional funding to go to direct install, and we are seeing some folks sign up for that. but it is still very small when you look at, you know, the value of residential and small commercial in Southeast New Mexico compared to the larger, you know, industrial market down there. So the economy of scale, I think, is very small. We do hope that eventually we'll see something like, you know, in the mid-90s when Saber Switch was very popular down there. We also had a hot water heater, you know, program down there that was very successful years and years and years ago, that I think with the right marketing, we can probably get there. But we're not expecting to see any real benefit from either one of those thermostat programs, at least for the next 3 to 5 years, until we really get a lot of people enrolled. And when you look at the residential market down there, it is so small, mostly mobile homes, mostly older homes. It's just going to take a while, I think, to really get penetrated in those homes. We've done a lot of work on like the home energy squad side. So we have a home energy services program that have gone out there and done a lot in the market. But at the time we were doing thermostats, but you know, years ago they weren't equipped for Wi-Fi and they weren't able to connect.
Right.
They weren't part of, you know, our Wi-Fi enabled system. So we're increasing, I think, you know, who's eligible in that market, and hopefully we can try to also get some direct install. Previously, when we've tried to do some direct install work with Saber switches down there, we've actually had to hire contractors from Colorado to go down there.
Okay.
They'll go down there and do a whole swath of them in a month. And that kind of creates a little bit of a customer touch point though, right? You order a Saber switch or a thermostat and it takes months for them to get down there and actually install it. And so we're looking at, you know, who's available down there that we can contract with to do some direct install. But again, that service territory is so spread out, is so thin. We're not having a lot of luck in any of our programs to get market actors down there. We're having to bring them in from other areas, Texas, Colorado, things like that.
Right. Well, I certainly empathize and agree with you with the how tough that is, the market that you're working in. And, you know, I'm sure you're thinking about the notion of just sort of neighborhood blitzes and sections, and just being able to do, you know, for a mobile home park or a apartment complex, or you know, particularly at your moderate to low incomes, just to be able to go in and touch everyone and do the direct install and combine it with your other basic home weatherization and energy efficiency improvements. And I assume that you're doing things around, you know, water, faucet aerators and all of that. And, you know, it's to make it work best, of course, is to bundle everything together and just do it. And the customer value that you get over time is tremendous.
Mm-hmm. We have, yeah, in our home energy services program, we do have a low income home energy services piece and just a normal. Both are very successful in New Mexico, and I think we're hoping to capitalize on those market actors that are in that program to, you know, offer other offerings. Hey, we've got this demand management offering. We can, you know, upgrade, you know, the low income stuff is almost basically free. Those measures are free. We just pay. But, you know, for a small upcharge, we can, you know, offer you a thermostat. The problem is most of those home energy services guys that are doing weatherization aren't, you know, licensed to put in a new thermostat, right? And so you've got to figure out how to still then get somebody down there and do that. And so that's some of the struggles that we've had. But yeah, definitely economies of scale and promoting the programs across the board is something that, you know, our marketing team and our program managers have been, yeah, definitely hard at work doing.
Okay, well, good luck to you.
Thank you.
And then but you are, well, never mind. I was just wondering if you're working with any kind of dollar per kW per year cost on the DR programs, bundled or separate. What are you modeling, I guess I should ask? That's a cost.
I'm sure we have the cost per kW. I will say that right now, looking at the portfolios that we filed, you know, for 23, 24, and 25, demand management isn't really cost effective yet, and it's going to take a couple of years to get it up there. And so that's the great thing that I think about the way the rules are set up, is that the portfolio as a whole in energy efficiency has to be cost effective. So you can have some other programs that maybe help
Right.
up some of that weight while these programs are in development. We didn't put them out there as pilots because we thought there is some value in, making sure that folks know that these programs will be in market for a while and that we're not just going to
Okay.
back out, right? There's a little bit of that customer perception over the last several years, especially when we tried originally put the thermostat program in market in 2016, I believe. It was envisioned as a pilot, was in market for 3 years and then pulled right back out. So we're trying to change a little bit of that perception. As far as forecasting, I'd have to ask somebody else on as far as what we're forecasting, but as far as savings goes for those two programs, we do have those forecasts out in the portfolio plan and the triennial plan.
Okay. I have a question from Michael Kinney at SWEEP, who wasn't able to be here today for you. He was wondering if you have a demand response energy efficiency potential study of some sort. He said he hasn't seen one yet out of your Texas SPS. Mexico SPS.
Yep. So we were required in our 2019 triennial to to conduct an energy efficiency potential study.
Okay.
That potential study was completed and filed in the 2022, we called it the potential study filing or refiling of our triennial plan, where we essentially adjusted our energy savings targets off of that 5% because of the potential study.
Okay.
There was no demand component to that potential study. The commission did not require us to do that because we didn't have any really in market.
Okay. If you could just send that to Michael and CC me on that, I'd appreciate it. Michael's
Actually, Jack, is that something we can post to the group website? I think as a resource for everyone. I mean, presumably it's filed somewhere.
Hey, Jay, this is Zoe. I'll jump in. That is, public filing. So I can certainly provide the docket number to GridWorks so that folks can find that. Thank you.
Great.
Sure.
Jeremy, I had a few follow-up. Unless I don't see any other questions in the chat at the moment. I had a few follow-up questions, and I was gonna. There were questions from our last group meeting from the statement of need group, so I'm gonna post these in the chat as well. But Jeremy, I had a few follow-up questions. There's really a question for the group. Trying to tie together one of the key near-term questions is meeting the projected capacity shortage right near the end of the decade here. That's going to be the kind of the underlying driver for this upcoming action plan. So I'd want to tie together a few points or things that you said when you talked about demand management not being cost effective. What's the time frame for that? Right, all of this, the focus here is going to be up procuring resources for 2028 to 2030. Assuming demand resources can meet that need as well. So how do you, when you said it was not cost effective, is it a forward-looking understanding that you have a upcoming gap there?
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on, what we're able to do in the customer space, right? How many customers we're able to get enrolled. The more in energy efficiency, with the way that the UCT is set up, there's not a lot of opportunity for some of the other value streams to really show benefit in these portfolios. It's basically just the cost you put out and what the customer pays. And so right now we're struggling with, a lot of our programs are cost effective. Demand management isn't, partly because of kind of the upfront cost it gets to get these programs, lifted off the ground and kind of in market. I can't speak as far as timeframes on when we think it would be cost effective. I'm hoping within the next 5 to 7 years, we'll see something. As long as they stay in the EE portfolio, there's an opportunity to allow them to grow, right? And to keep them in market and still be able to say, look, they're valuable as part of this holistic portfolio. But as far as aiding to the larger system need here, I think Ben could probably reiterate that we're not expecting these programs, the two existing or any others that we were going to propose, to really have an impact on that system need within the next 10 years. Especially those thermostat programs where you're really just targeting such a small load in every customer's home. So I don't know. I don't know if Sean White's on or if anyone else wants to chime in there, but that's kind of my take on that.
I had a follow-up, or I'll let you go. I had a follow-up on, well, on that as well, but go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I may just point out maybe one slight addition there to what Jeremy was just commenting on. As we look at some of these higher load growth forecasts, you noticed earlier I called it an electrification and emerging technologies forecast. Some of those emerging technologies have the potential to be very high energy usage customers who have expressed in the past the willingness to be interrupted at times. So in addition to the programs that we have in place today that Jeremy was just describing, as we look at some of these higher load forecast scenarios, we probably have a slightly increased appetite for demand response. So I think as we look at our different load forecasts, there's a different appetite for DR in each of those forecasts, Jay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think that gets to my next question, which had your projection on the DG solar. I think it showed it basically being all residential. My question is, or two, is any of that assumed to be paired with storage in the time in this upcoming, or I guess one, what's your thinking about that being paired with storage in the future?
John, or maybe punt that one to you.
Yeah, I'll start answering that one and let our DG forecasters jump in if they feel they need to add anything. Right now, we're not modeling storage along with our solar systems. Clearly there's an emerging potential for that. It's not something we have a lot of data on what the kind of the charge discharge patterns would look like, and it's likely to be small for a fairly extended period of time. Maybe once we get a little bit further out in the forecast, into the 2030s, 2040s, we'll see more rapid adoption of that. But we expect the impacts to be minimal over the next 10 years or so.
John, you summed it up nicely. Like, we're just not seeing that materiality of storage yet, or anticipating that in the next handful of years. So that, yeah, right now we don't have that incorporated. Yeah, you answered that well.
Okay, and I get. I mean, you're talking someone that I'm coming from a place where it's over 90% of the systems today are paired with storage behind the meter. And we relied on that for our coal plant retirement we just went through last year. And partly by necessity, because we fell behind on our timelines to install utility scale projects. So I think I want to bring that to the group. When you look at your risk, project execution risk, having spread some of that across some of these other measures is something you want to be thinking about. Something we had to do by necessity, that we went on, and we went to a scheduled dispatch program where basically the storage is programmed to discharge during peak periods, and so it was at the utility's direction what the discharge pattern is. So there's other experience out there, I guess, related to that. Your projection showed pretty much all residential DG solar, and I guess my question to what's on the commercial industrial customers, there's no, or why is it so limited through that time period?
So I'll let John answer from the actual load forecast perspective, but let me maybe just suggest one thing on the C&I point. So by doing 2 or 3 different load forecasts, we've got kind of our middle of the range forecast has some decent load growth in the oil field, but certainly not full electrification. And then we have the other bookend, which would be essentially us meeting all load growth in the Permian Basin. We think the answer is going to be somewhere in between the two, Jay. The answer is going to be some of the oil and gas companies are likely to do their own self-built generation. So it's going to be somewhere in between that number, but we have no way right now, as it stands today, with the standby rules only just been approved, to be able to say that number is going to be 50%, it's going to be 70%, it's going to be 20%. So I think that's where we hit we hit it with having two bookends. We get to study it under two loads cases, knowing that the answer is going to be somewhere in between.
Okay, so if I understood it right, you're thinking it's in the range of assumptions you have for the oil and gas load growth. It's basically embedded in there, or it could be covered by that range. Is that?
Exactly, because if you start looking at DERs, you start looking at energy efficiency demands, DSM, all of that stuff currently acts as a load reduction. So we don't model it as a generation resource per se, we model it as a reduction to load. So if we've got two different load forecasts, one being higher, one being lower, and we think those are pretty aggressive and conservative estimates, with a likely range being in the middle, we essentially are covering it, even if we're not specifying or breaking it out individually.
This is Cynthia. I wanted to jump in on that, Ben. I'm not sure that I quite understand that. I think I heard you to say that your forecast of the gas oil industry, particularly what will be the high electrification, has embedded in it what would be the industry's potential self-gen, their own solar storage. And I'd like James Hall to speak about that some as well. I'm not sure that actually the industry's projection or possible build out of self-gen is known enough to be in your forecast now. So this is a huge matter of I think big importance, because here's a real big opportunity.
Yeah, Cynthia, because maybe I misstated it or you misheard, so I want to just clarify that point before we go to Jane. So in our electrification and emerging technologies forecast, that for the most part would assume very little build out of oil and gas self-built projects. So that would be XL Energy providing most of that power. So that would be one bookend. And then on the other side, our second forecast, planning forecast, would assume very little growth in the oil and gas field, which you could substitute for being full self-built projects by the oil and gas industries. So we've got two bookends there. The likely answer is going to be somewhere in between. But to your point, how far in between, we just don't know yet until we start seeing these projects being built in reality. So I think we're covering both options as bookends.
Okay, and say the first bookend again. You said it.
So in the electrification emerging technologies forecast, that would be like our very high load case scenario. Right. So that would be essentially assuming, for the most part, not in its entirety, that SPS are supplying most of the power for the electrification of the oil field.
Oh, okay.
So
I thought you said it. Okay, I thought you said Excel, Texas. No, that's okay. Yeah, got it.
Okay, shall I let me make a couple of comments here. So just so everyone's on the same page. So there was a study done in 2022 it was co-funded by a selection of some of the larger players in Southeast New Mexico in the oil and gas industry to understand what electrification could do to load forecasts and sort of demand needs over the next 20 years. And the take-home message from that study that was published in January 2023, and I think it's in the public domain, so I can make it available to the group after the call, was that the current load demand in Southeast New Mexico is 800 megawatts for the oil and gas industry, and that's going to go to something like, and this is kind of the estimate, the P50, if you will, something like 5 gigawatts by 2032. So that's a pretty substantial amount of growth. And I think that's reflective of Ben's comment around the high side case modeling that they're considering doing, which is good to hear that this data is going to be incorporated. In terms of how much self-generation will meet that sort of excess demand, the standby tariff, which kind of helps this behind the meter ambition for the industry was only put in place on June the 14th. So it's pretty freshly drying paint. And there's no doubt that a lot of companies, including ExxonMobil, are thinking about what would those behind the meter options look like. And I can see, a path to that reducing peak demand, right? If you're thinking about solar behind the meter options. I'm not sure how much battery storage will be incorporated into that type of activity over the next 10 to 15 years, primarily because I just don't have line of sight to, who's looking at that from our group and industry. So I think Ben, you've got it well if you've got that high side case that assumes not so much self-generation, and then an intermediate case that can be replaced for some self-generation, reducing that load demand. I think that's a pretty pragmatic way to move forward.
Thank you, James.
Sorry, I know Jim's been waiting, but I had 2 follow-up questions maybe for James and for SPS. One, James, thanks. You beat me to it on the making the study available to everyone. So we'll make sure that gets up. And 2, I guess, can somebody speak a little bit more about the standby tariff, just so for the group's benefit? I'm not sure. I'm not sure Chloe may be the right one here.
Oh, I'm not the right one. And I don't know that we have someone on the call that can. Let me see.
I guess we don't have it here. If we can
Yeah,
find the
so
right.
here's what I can do, Jay, in the interim before the July 6th, and Austin's putting himself on the video. I think he was an attorney in that case. Full disclosure, I was on maternity leave during the pendency of that case, so I'm not as familiar with it as others might be. But I can send you, again, the docket number, the final order in that case, and that should provide everyone some information before July 6th. And I don't know, Austin, you might have some information. Hey, he already gave you the case number.
I just put the case number in the chat. Essentially, the standby tariff was something that was an interest of. By the way, I represent the New Mexico large customer group, of which Exxon and James are a part. The standby tariff was something that was an interest of large customers, especially those operating in the Permian. For a number of SPS rate cases, we brought it up a couple times, and finally, just kind of through negotiations with a number of parties and SPS, we were able to come to an agreement on a tariff that, as James mentioned, was just put in place a couple weeks ago, was just approved a couple weeks ago by the commission. I put the case number in there so anyone is able to go pull up the final version of that tariff, and there's tons of testimony and the commission order in that case to kind of go through it depending on how in depth you want to get. But it's essentially a tariff that will provide incentives for large customers to install their own behind the meter generation. Typically, solar is what the idea is. Most of that will be, and then by investing their own funds in that behind the meter generation, the idea is those customers will provide their own power, typically during peak periods, because that's when the sun is shining for the solar facilities. And then they will rely on SPS's system and SPS generated power more when the solar is not operating. And the way it's structured is there's kind of incentives in that where SPS or customers will pay sort of a lower rate during off-peak periods. And then if their solar is not generating during on-peak, they kind of pay a higher premium rate to take SPS power at that time. So I'll be frank, I'm not kind of prepared to get into all the details and the fine
Austin, you
rate structure and everything, but
you did very well on the spot.
That's all right.
I think that's the level of overview. I think, at least for now. I guess my question to SPS, when you had your load projections, it was that, how, if all, this tariff was factored in?
I will, Jay, just mention that we just got final approval of that tariff 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, understood.
SPS, well, I won't speak for SPS, but as Zoe just said, I'm not sure that they've customers who might use that tariff are just starting to look at the economics that based on the rates that were approved in the tariff. So I think it's still very early. It's a great incentive and great opportunity for large customers, but much too soon to kind of project how much actual self-generation it will produce.
Yeah, and
Okay.
Jay, with to kind of echo Austin's comments there, with it being so new and so unknown, it's hard for us to say, hey, there's going to be 2,000 megawatts of solar online by 2027, for example. So the way we're treating it right now is by doing two sensitivities on the load forecast, excuse me. The very high case, that includes pretty much all the additional oil and gas growth. The medium case, that assumes the percentage would be self-served, but again, it's really trying to find bookends because we just don't know what that number is.
Okay. That's been helpful. Jim, you've been very patient. You posted a number of questions in here. So please, if you want to come online and ask.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate that. Yeah, I just want to bring attention a couple of things. First of all, there is a new interconnection rule in New Mexico. It updates the interconnection rule from 2008. And a big part of that was to make it easier to integrate storage and advanced inverters. And the hope is that that will encourage a quicker adoption of those technologies, because I think we all know that the future of solar is going to be solar with storage, because there's just so much solar and we're hitting points of saturation in certain areas. So I would encourage SPS to look at that when they're making estimates in that area. And SPS was a major participant in that proceeding, so they should be familiar with it. And SPS is also participating in the technical interconnection interoperability guidelines that are currently in place. In fact, we just had a meeting yesterday. So that's to put in more technical definitions and how we're going to actually incorporate specifically advanced inverters in that to make them more friendly with the grid. So that was one point I wanted to make. Another point, and I think I brought this up at Roswell, what was that, a week or two ago, about the 45 megawatts of community solar that has been allocated to SPS. And I believe there was a comment that it was not considered that significant. And that might be so, but I think we should still not forget about that. It is 45 megawatts, and I think that should be accounted for. And then just kind of a general.
Jim, just to respond to that comment.
Yeah, please do, and I'll hold off on my last question. Thank you.
Yeah, we can absolutely, and we will include the 45 megawatts of community solar. But I do just want to kind of go back to that earlier comment that it was insignificant, because I don't want that to kind of be swept away. When we look at our potential load growth scenarios, as James was just saying, we've got the difference between 800 megawatts of demand in the Permian today going to 4,000 megawatts, in 7 years. So we're absolutely not saying community solar is insignificant. I want to make that very clear. We're just saying 45 megawatts when we're talking about load growth, that's in the 3,000 to 4,000 megawatt range, is just where we were looking at as a percentage basis, but certainly not saying community solar is insignificant. Just wanted to make that clear.
Appreciate that, and we'll try to get more community solar over there, so it'll be a larger amount and provide more help. Thank you again for that. I did have a question. I know this is kind of part of how integrated resource planning works, and traditionally that behind the meter solar is considered a load reduction. And I guess when I first heard about that, I had trouble with that, because these are generators. It's not like I'm putting insulation in my attic or getting a more efficient furnace or something. But I understand that it's hard to have visibility into that. But I think we're reaching a point where, especially with the amounts we're talking about, we need to start looking at them as not load reduction, but generation. And so just kind of a question, how do you see that happening, and what do we need to get there?
I think there's probably two answers to that question. So first of all, before I maybe answer the question, we've got to keep in mind the rules that govern whether something's a generator or a load reduction is by the SPP, so by the Southwest Power Pool. In some DERs can be treated as generators right now, but the specific rules they have to follow, they have to be controllable and dispatchable. I think they have to be greater than 10 megawatts. And I think they obviously have to be registered in the SPP market as well. So there is a path for DERs to be classed as a generator. Right now, everything that SPS has on the system is a load reduction. So as you continue to talk about maybe some smaller projects, 5 megawatts, 3 megawatts, they're probably going to continue to be a load reduction if they can't be called upon by the SPP. As we start looking at some of these larger facilities that Austin and James were just kind of alluding to, some of these larger projects that are within the Southwest Power Pool footprint, if the oil and gas companies decide to register them within the market, if they are controlled with full dispatchable, and if they can flow back onto the transmission system, then they may start be counted as a generating resource. There's different rules, there's advantages and disadvantages to both. I would say, Jim, right now, rooftop solar being counted as a load reduction actually gets favorable treatment compared to if it was counted as a generator. For the simple reason, if you do a load reduction, you reduce your peak load and you also save the 15% plan and reserve margin. If you move it to the generator side of the ledger, it's then a generator that you then also have to carry the 15% PRM. So I guess in summary, Jim, is there a reason why you specifically feel like it should be counted as a generator as opposed to a load reduction?
Well, I think just from a philosophical standpoint, if we take it from load reduction to a generator, it gives it more prominence in something like an IRP. But as long as it's part of load reduction, it's kind of swept into this whole other world of, again, putting insulation in my attic, putting a new HVAC system. We saw the presentation on thermostats. I mean, thermostats $50 or $25 or something. Investment in a behind the meter solar system is much more significant than that. I think we need to recognize it for what it is. It's a generator. Pure and simple. And so by differentiating because of where it's located and because of the size, I think in the long term, we need to change how we look at that. And as we all know, there's also a lot of going on now. We're in the early stages of aggregating these assets. So if I aggregate enough of 10 kWs and 100 kWs and 1 megawatts, pretty soon I got some real megawatts. But I think the start of this is to recognize them as generators.
Yeah, and I'm pretty happy to commit today if that's the approach that the modeling group want to take. Is we could start modeling DERs as generators. Now they wouldn't be counted that way within the SPP footprint until the rules change. But from a modeling perspective, we absolutely could model DR solutions as generators and incorporate them into our modeling.
Hey Ben, this is Sonia. I am one of the modelers. I'm happy to do that on our side. We will just probably need a little bit more information about load shape and different things like that. So it can be done. Just
that was going to be my follow-up question is what may help this is to see the load shape assumed for the behind the meter solar.
Sure. And this is John. We can certainly help with that. We can send the forecast without the solar reductions and then the energy associated with solar and then the production curves for it, the assumed production curves.
Jim, I didn't want to speak for you, but it seems like two follow-ups here are we'd asked about it with the EVs and for DG solar, understanding what the implied load shape is. And I guess my follow-up to that is how, when we talked in Roswell, there's a lot of talk about the capacity accreditation of solar. And I read that it came from SPP. How consistent is any of this formulated well enough to understand?
I'm sorry, there's some noise in my own personal background. So yeah, I mean, I think what I heard was that we can maybe start by looking at it in modeling and seeing what that does.
Jim, that's correct. I think Ben and Sonia had said they're well more than open to talking about it. I think they're open to trying that approach. I guess all I offered was let's look at what the actual how they treat the resource now and see how much.
Yes, yeah, I appreciate that very much in that offer, and I'm just trying to start a conversation. Hey, you know, can we look at this from a different perspective? And I appreciate the willingness to consider that.
Okay. And then Ben, I just had a question on how basically what's the capacity value of the, you know, behind the meter resource versus what you assume with the front of the meter utility scale. Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, double muted. So right now the capacity value for behind the meter generation would be 115%. So if you have it reducing the peak, so assuming a 1 megawatt of solar, rooftop solar reduces the peak by 1 megawatt, if you make that assumption, I don't know if that's true, then you would actually save 15% more on your capacity need, because you would reduce your load by 1 megawatt, and then you wouldn't have to carry the 15% reserves. So right now, just want to make it very clear, right now, behind the meter generation with DERs has a greater capacity value than 100%. If you move it to the generator side of the ledger, you will be at most 100%, but likely reduced by effective load carrying capability.
Yeah, and I'll just clarify, or you know, to your first point, Ben, it's not a 1 megawatt system is reducing 1 megawatts on peak, because that's the sun's not, you know, the brightest when it's peaking, right? So that assumption is built into the peak impacts we're currently assuming. It's roughly 60 to 70%, I would say, during a summer peak hour. But you're right. Then on top of that, you're saving an additional 15% of that 70% by treating it as a load reduction instead of a resource.
Can I just ask a question to that point, because I'm a little confused? So we had the same system. Let's just say this behind the meter system generates 10,000 kilowatt hours a year. So if I have it in demand reduction, that value of that 10,000 kilowatt hours is more than if I have it as a generator. I just want to make sure I understand what the statement.
Yes, that's correct. And Jim, maybe I'll give you a different example, because I think this example is easier to show. Let's talk about a 4-hour demand response program and compare it to a 4-hour battery project. If you have a 4-hour demand response program, that's 100 megawatts. That would be 100 megawatt load reduction. And then you also save the 15% PRM. So from a capacity need perspective, you're saving 115 megawatts. If you have a 4-hour battery on the supply side, one, you don't get the 15% saving. You still have to plan for that capacity need. So there's less value there. And then a supply side resource is counted as the effective load carrying capability. So then you only get a percentage of that 100 megawatts. So you get a double whammy. There's a double hit for it being counted as a supply side resource. So Jim, when you mentioned earlier about should we consider counting these resources as a generator, my answer is yes, absolutely. And it's because right now I feel that by being a demand reduction, they're actually overstated. So I think you see now within the Southwest Power Pool, they are considering demand response as being a supply side resource and including it in the ELCC studies.
I appreciate the response. I'm going to have to wrap my head around that. So thank you.
Okay, and I'm happy, Jim, if if we need to talk, more than happy to get on the phone with you.
Yeah, maybe we can do that. I appreciate the offer. Thank you very much. I don't want to, take up too much time on this.
Thank you. I do want to make sure we cover, these are questions carried over from the statement of need group. So Ben, I think Margie had sent them to us. I think we've covered, I posted them in the chat a little while ago. So one question was, can we include the increased demand response scenario? I think the answer to that is yes. It needs to be formulated. I think that's part of what you're asked, but I think conceptually, you know, that's in the realm here. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We can absolutely model a demand response scenario. We just obviously need to make sure it's kind of in keeping with our customer wants and needs. So we can't, you know, model 1,000 megawatt demand response, you know, on a 4,000 megawatt system. So we just need to be realistic in our assumptions there. But yeah, we can certainly model DR.
Okay, and I think that's where we're going to transition to shortly. But second question from that group was, how are distributed resources considered in the modeling? I think we've covered. I mean, I think that was the first presentation. It today, right? These are fundamentally load modifiers. Okay, yeah, and you know, back and forth about that. The third question was, well, how is it distributed? Considered in the load forecast, but and what costs are assigned. Actually, that's a good topic we haven't talked about. On, you know, who's, well, I guess can you get the since it's a customer side investment, I guess, in your modeling, how is that treated?
Yeah, so I think if you look at doing two models, you do a baseline that doesn't include an energy efficiency or DSM or DR program. So you set your baseline, and then your model an alternative scenario that includes that energy efficiency, DSM, DRE impact. You know that the cost is good. It's not going to be a cost impact. There's going to be cost savings. That has to be. If you just subtract load from the model, you know you're going to end up with a lower PVRR outcome. So my suggestion would be you do the two scenarios, you quantify the difference or the savings between one scenario to the next, and that would essentially be the value of those programs. So let me restate that. Let's say you did a scenario in which you did not include a demand response program, and your total system cost on PVRR basis was $12 billion. You then run another scenario in which you add, let's say, 100 megawatt demand response program. In your PVRR savings over a 20, 30-year period are, say, $100 million less. We could then quantify the value of that demand response program would be $100 million. And then we can go to Jeremy and Jeremy's team and say, okay, is this program cost effective from a customer perspective? In other words, would customers sign up to this program knowing the value of it is X amount of dollars per kW month? That's typically how we would do that sort of calculation. And I appreciate, Jay, just real quickly, I'm getting really into modeling weeds on these phone calls. And I know we initially started trying to keep them high level. So I want to make sure I'm not losing too many people on too much technical talk here.
No, I think this is where we wanted to get to. But I guess, yeah, is there a question from the group on that approach? And I think that's consistent with what is being developed with P&M from what I saw. I think maybe I want to bring Cynthia up and others that have been thinking about potential modeling scenarios here. Do you want to respond? I mean, you know, Ben laid out how he thought about the modeling approach.
That's fabulous. That's the way we'd like to see it done. And I was just trying to think as to what would be the magnitude or the amount that we would want modeled in this category of, and I wouldn't just call it demand response, but distributed energy resources, so that we can pick up all the elements that we've been talking about. Jeremy's demand response, but also the opportunities for load shifting and load shedding with the high tech loads. Jeremy said that, you know, all the Jeremy and I spoke in Roswell, he said most, if not all of those loads, the servers, data servers and all that come with their own backup or have their own backup. And that the company's been talking to those loads about being, you know, agreeing to in tariff or contract form to shed and shift load. So that's another important element that we're not really, I don't think, capturing now. Then all the elements, or the 2 or 3 elements that Jim Desjardins spoke of, we want to roll into that. And then the elements that James Hall and the rest of the oil and gas industry is considering as they evaluate this standby tariff. So all of those would have different load shapes, right? And they'd have different magnitudes of amount over time. Yeah, so that's what we'd like to model, and do it in a way that's not so incredibly complicated, but not just a DR number.
The one thing I'll maybe just say, just as we talk about those scenarios, we're going to need to obviously start quantifying them pretty quickly, because, and I'm going to pick on demand response, Cynthia, but I'm not narrowing this conversation just to demand response. But demand response has an antagonistic relationship with battery energy storage. So as you increase demand response programs, you decrease the value of battery energy storage and vice versa. So if we start having scenarios in which we model very large penetrations of demand response, we may also have to go and look at the ELCC values to credit it to battery and reduce those numbers. So there's some additional work that needs to be done if we start having very large DR inputs into our models.
Okay, and I would need to understand that more, and I wasn't aware of that specifically. I guess I almost understood it to be the inverse of that demand response actually helps improve the ELCCs of battery storage, and that's based on California.
Yeah, no,
recent California.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I don't want to get into that now, but there's studies where we do the ELCC studies for battery energy storage. Demand response is a vital input, because essentially, if you start doing a 4-hour demand response program and you shave the peak by 4 hours, then your battery's being pushed down into a thicker load shape, into a wider load shape.
Right.
So the actual value is reducing. So that's why there's a lot of push right now, as I was saying earlier to Jim, of moving demand response into an effective load carrying capability study. So you're essentially giving them equal treatment. At the moment, DR is getting preferential treatment that's lowering the value of storage.
Okay, well, so let's come up with a way forward right now, Ben, if we could. So we want to do all things DER sensitivity, and we want to have, say, the elements that some of us have spoken of, the residential, commercial, ACDR, the interruptible, or load shifting tariff or program for the data centers at all, the elements of DER that Jim spoke of, and then possible oil and gas, behind the meter response. And I appreciate what you're saying about your bookend approach to the load forecast, the high and then the low. And so I guess what we're saying is, or thinking about, is that there needs to be, say, with the low, some sort of quantification as to what would be the basis or elements of that from DER. I mean, I'm not exact, you were saying earlier that your load forecast captures in part or whole what would be these elements.
John was saying we capture the DER that's on the system today, and John's obviously got some projections of rooftop solar that's coming on for the next 10, 20 years. But are you suggesting, Cynthia, additional DER ahead of what John presented earlier?
Well, I think that's what is being discussed by the group. One would be, yeah. I mean, for instance, I was fascinated with Jay's point that in Hawaii, 90% of all the DG solar is being paired with storage, and that's being scheduled for dispatch as a program that's managed by the utility. So that's pretty innovative. And so what would happen if we tried to add that as a build out element here And then the same thing with, you know, a load shedding, load shifting tariff or program for your high-tech industrial, large commercial loads, the data centers and such.
So,
I mean, we can look at that, Cynthia. I'm just sorry, Jay. Just one thing. I mean, we need to be careful about drawing too many comparisons to like a system like Hawaii's. Obviously, Jay, I'm assuming your costs are significantly more expensive than Southeast New Mexico. So historically, we haven't seen the cost impact where we've seen customers pairing rooftop solar and batteries to a large extent, as Steve and John was explaining earlier. So, I mean, I want to just be a little bit careful about modeling that assumption in the next 5 years if we're going to see some sort of mass adoption in very rural Southeast New Mexico.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump in on a couple of things. So it did take us more than 10 years to get to the point we're at now. But I think I had a good reminder. One, you know, in our meeting at Roswell, Ben and team had gone through the scenario request form, but not everyone on this call has been through that. And I think maybe if you could touch on that quickly and then use that to help frame really what was the second point of us coming together was to help formulate, you know, alternative demand side resource scenarios. So to get to Cynthia's point, one, you know, how do we put that in the framework of the form that you had? And then two, I think Ben, it may help if you can articulate, you know, what does SPS need really to help? What are the key parameters, you know, that this group needs to work on and put forward to you? I think I want to put it that way, but maybe first if we can run through the form so everyone's on the same page there, and then use that to shape the discussion, the final minutes on the demand side scenario. Does that help?
Yeah, is Deb, that'd be great. Jay, is Deb or yourself able to bring that form up on the GridWorks website and share the screen?
Oh, geez, now you're putting us on the spot.
I could also share my screen potentially, Ben, if you want me to.
Yeah.
Yes.
The link is on the GridWorks website. I don't want to risk this. So Sonia, if you could do it, yeah.
Okay, give me 1 minute and I'll bring it up. Okay, it should be loading, but it looks like it's slow, so 1 second.
So as this is loading, I'll go ahead and just start talking, just in interest of time. So the expectation here was if anybody wanted some adjustments to the base model or the base scenarios that we presented at the last meeting, they would essentially go to the GridWorks website, open up this form, and then they would select in the first 3 or 4 questions or checkboxes, you would essentially select the scenarios that you would like SPS to start with. So still can't see the form, but just with that in mind, there's like, we would like to see the base load scenario with a 15% plan and reserve margin under the base gas forecasting, whatever other assumption SPS is presented. And then there's an area at the bottom of this form for you to submit your suggested changes. So for example, you may say, Cynthia, that I would like to see a scenario in which we have 200 megawatts of demand response or an extra 100 megawatts of DERs within the model. Now, the more specific you can be, the better. So if you think about a production cost model like Encompass, it's an input-based model. So really, if you say, hey, I would like to see 100 megawatt demand response added to the model, oh, here we go. So yeah, just maybe I'll start again just real quickly now it's on the screen. So you would go into this form. In the first several questions, you would select the different scenarios that SPS presented during the last meeting. So for example, question 1, do you want to see your model sensitivity under the existing 15% plan and reserve margin requirement or the increased plan and reserve margin requirement where we model 18% in the summer and 20% in the winter? You would go through each of those questions and hit the radio button there, and so if you could scroll down. Again, if you just scroll down to the bottom, so all the assumptions are listed here, and then you would go down into the requested change. So again, as I was just saying, I would like to see a case with 100 megawatts of additional demand response. And the more specific you could be, the better. So is it a demand response program that you could call upon one time a year? Or is it demand response program that you could call upon for the entire summer season? Or is it maybe a demand response program you could call upon all year round? How long is the demand response program? Is it a 2-hour program, a 4-hour program? So the more specific you could be, the better. And that also applies to DERs. So Jim, let's say you wanted to see a scenario in which we model an extra 20 megawatts of DER. Is that solar? Because if it's solar, it's going to have a different load profile or load reduction profile or a generating profile than it would be if it was, say, a gas DER. So again, just the more specific you can be, keeping in mind the production cost model is an hourly input model, so we're going to need to make assumptions. So the sooner you can get the form in, the quicker we can come back to you and ask for any clarifying questions that we need to answer in order to get it into an hourly model. And then the last box there is just obviously your contact information. So I'll just quickly pause there. Do we have any questions on the actual form itself? Does anybody have the chance to get in there and open one up? Maybe if we start there.
I did put the link in the chat so people have access to it.
Sorry,
If someone was talking then, I couldn't hear you.
there's a link in the chat.
Jake said
here.
he put the link in the chat. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Jake.
That's different, that we have one on the GridWorks website as well.
It is to the same form. The link just looks slightly different because I think we gave you guys a shortened version, but it's to the same.
Okay, so just not, yeah, there's 2 places you can go to get this, and please submit it to Ben and I. Let's see, Ben asked, are there questions on, on the form for now? Cynthia had one. I guess I just wanted to be more specific on, right, we're talking about, modeling the different types, forms of demand side resources. Ben, you need, basically, let's be clear, you need basically a you guys get what you need to help formulate the scenario. So hopefully, you have other questions to Ben on that. And then you had another question here about the base scenario. So,
right, I'm just wondering how much the base scenario is similar to your TOLC model scenario in your rate case.
So the level 0 scenario, which was the multi-jurisdictional kind of baseline we were going to set, would be very, very similar to the TOLC scenario. But in this IRP, sorry, Cynthia, go on.
Oh no, so just you said say that again. Your base scenario.
The multi-jurisdictional baseline, the level 0 scenario, would be very similar to TOLC IRP analysis. But when we come down, if you recall, we start doing the different technology assumptions. So the base assumption is going to be existing commercially available technologies today, which is wind, solar, batteries. That will be pretty different to our TOLC analysis in the IRP, or excuse me, in the rate case. So on the 6th of July, the next meeting.
Okay, and essentially that means that you'd be taking out the new gas build.
Correct. There will be no new gas in that base. We will have a scenario in which we allow new gas on the assumption it will convert to hydrogen or be carbon captured by 2045.
But that's down the analysis.
Yeah. So what we're going to do, Cynthia, on the 6th of July is we're going to present some real draft modeling, and we're going to talk you through the kind of the results of the model with no new gas at all, and then we'll show you the results with the gas just to kind of set the baseline. But those models would just be draft because, as we talked about in the last meeting, we're going to use the updated NREL data that comes out in July, and I think that will significantly change the results.
Right. Well, yeah, thank you very much. I just want to say to you and the SPS team, thank you so much for being so open.
Absolutely. Happy here to help.
Yeah. I don't have any more questions. Look forward to the meeting on the 6th, and I hope you all take some time off between now and then.
Hopefully, that's the plan.
I know we just have a few more minutes. I want to make sure any other questions from the group here for Ben and his team.
We just got one from Jeff Pollock. One sec.
Oh. Jeff, do you want to come online here and ask?
Sure, I can ask. So on this form, I'm just trying to figure out how to use it. So are we supposed to use this form essentially to specify a specific scenario? Because I'm kind of assuming that SPS is going to run multiple portfolios using a range of, for example, range of commodity prices and things of that area as they typically do. So am I correct? So is this supposed to be just if we want to request a specific kind of tailored portfolio with one selection for each of the level options there, or what? I'm just trying to figure out how to provide feedback.
Yeah, Jeff. So that was the way the form was developed. About it was going to be a very specific, tailored scenario for someone's request, where they would like to see a scenario under certain conditions. Okay. If you would like to see a certain scenario, but under the suite of low, medium, and high gas, then I think I wouldn't say submit 3 forms. You can probably just put in one form, and then just in your comments, just put, hey, also run this under high and low gas, for example.
Okay.
We were just trying to. The one thing we were trying to do, Jeff, is, you know, we can only run so many scenarios between now and filing the IRP. So we were just trying to keep it as tailored as we can and not just have everyone run every single scenario and sensitivity, you know, for each change we make.
Yeah. Have you kind of already presented a list of the scenarios you're going to run, so I don't request something that you're already doing or something close that you're already doing?
Yeah, that was in the last meeting. We presented the scenarios that SPS has suggested.
Okay.
So it should be on the website. Okay, perfect.
And maybe that's a good segue, because going into the July 6th meeting, Ben, SPS is going to present what you termed as your base model results, which are the two, going off my memory here, so we'll test it. That's the 2 planning reserve margin scenarios with your base assumptions on fuel prices and the conventional technologies. Is that so? There'll be 2 sets. Or
we were going to present 2, but not those 2, Jay. Just to be clear, I think
my memory's off. Okay, go ahead.
Don't you jump in and tell me when I'm wrong. But what our plan was to do was to present everything was going to be with a 15% PRN, existing PRN. And we were going to do 2 scenarios under that. Everything would be base case, so base gas, etc. And we would do one scenario in which there was essentially no new gas, so just wind, solar, battery energy storage. And then the other scenario in which we allowed new gas on top of that. Those were going to be the 2 we presented. Again, keeping in mind, the results are going to be very rough, draft, preliminary. And really what I was intending to use the July 6th meeting for wasn't to be like, this is exactly what the model's picking. My thought was just to present to the group, this is how a model solves. This is kind of the characteristics it's looking for. And this is why it's showing these resources in each expansion plan. And then we could talk through how stakeholder requested changes would impact the results of those expansion plans.
Okay, so that's great. So that's what everyone can expect on the 6th, and then the requests are, I think, informed by that. So I think we've asked people to submit those, but understanding there's probably going to be some coming in after that, and then we'll look at the group and see where things can be, where there's similarities, or maybe an effort to pull things, various requests together into one scenario. And then, understanding Ben's team's resource limitations, see what can be done in the remaining time frame. So that fair synopsis. I know we're basically out of time, but that's what people can expect going forward. Any other?
That's our expectation. Jay, I've got just one maybe last closing comment is as we receive these requests from stakeholders, our expectation is some of these stakeholders are probably going to be experts in the particular field they're asking requests on. So we are more than happy to accept any advice or any suggestions on how we should model the scenarios. I'll pick on Mr. Pollock, for example. Jeff's representing oil and gas companies. If he wants to see a particular scenario in which he has a specific gas price or gas forecast that he wants to see, any support and documentation we're willing to take on, assuming that's public information and not confidential.
Much appreciated. All right, I know we're over time. I just want to put one question out, and is there, this meeting was a request of different stakeholders. Is there interest in any sort of follow-up beyond what we've already scheduled? Meaning we have another stakeholder meeting for everyone on July 6th, and another one August 1st and 2nd.
For TRC staff, not anything additional yet. Thank you, Jay, for asking.
Hearing nothing else for now. Yeah, I want to echo that. I want to thank everyone for your time. I especially want to thank the SPS team for your willingness to be here, your transparency. I appreciate the dialogue that we had here. Glad it's recorded. Everyone, have a great 4th of July holiday coming up. And with that, we'll sign off. Take care.